Hello and welcome to another Magic the Gathering video, but today it's a bit different than the usual unboxings. By popular request, I'm going to do a video about modifying intro decks, or an intro deck. This is something that's come up quite a few times, and I've sort of done deck analysis before, but I don't think I've really done a full breakdown of tools and techniques that you can use to help with your, for want of a better word, deck evolution. When I started trying to put this together, one thing I found that it was the danger of turning into a series, which I wanted to avoid because there's some other stuff that I wanted to do. So this particular video covers a lot of different things, and really the idea is that it's to set you up thinking about how to modify your existing decks. It doesn't necessarily give you a finished deck to work with, but what it does is it sort of sets you on the road, and it suggests ways in which you can modify this deck, and also does suggest a couple of examples of people that have actually modified this deck, and you can see how that turned out basically. So first up, I'm going to just show you some useful tools when you're doing deck modifications. It is really nice to be able to lay the deck out on the desk, but sometimes that's not always practical. Sometimes you want to do this before you actually buy the deck to see if it's worth modifying. And one advantage in laying it out physically is you can lay it out in a mana curve and just see where everything sort of fits in and how things relate. What I've done is I've sort of done the next best thing, which is also easier for talking over, and I've put it into a product called Magic Assistant, which is a sort of card management, deck management program. And so what I've done is I've taken the original Simic Synthesis deck and just inputted this. So I'm suggesting that to get the best out of this video, it may be worthwhile, if anybody's not seen that video already, is to go back and watch that Simic Synthesis unboxing, just so you're a bit more familiar with the cards. So I'm using Magic Assistant to just help me structure the modifications and be able to talk about triggers and synergies and options that you've got within the deck. The other thing that I use, are the things that I use a lot when I'm just basically playing around with Magic decks and just playing around with Magic generally, is a series of very useful websites. Now the first really is I think a necessity if you're doing anything meaningful with Magic, is the Gatherer site, which is the Wizards official database of Magic cards, and this allows you to do sort of multiple searches on lots of different criteria. So if you were looking for, say, evolve cards in blue, let me just clear this out to show you. What you would do is, that the word evolve appears in the rules text, so you add that to your search, and then we'll just do blue at the moment. Evolve is in blue and green, and we'll do a search, and that will list all of the cards that have the evolve keyword on them. So you can see here, these are the ones in blue with that on there. And then you can do other things once you have this list up. For instance, you can do a sort on power, rarity, toughness, the community rating, if you want to just get a feel for what other people's opinions might be, and order that in some way. You can see like Fathom Mage, in terms of people that were voted on the Gatherer, is the most popular out of the ones in blue. So that's one really useful tool, I think, if you're going to be doing a lot of deck building, is to use the Gatherer to do searches for cards that are similar or meet similar criteria if you're looking for ideas. Second thing that's a good idea, particularly if you're working on a budget, and that's something that this video is biased towards, is basically budget changes, because I would probably do things slightly differently if I had a completely open-ended budget on this, but I'm just trying to keep things nice and simple, nice and cheap. Is use of a website that has sort of multiple card prices on it, like TCG Player, and it just gives you a feel for, if you go down to your local card shop, how much might I pay for a card if I'm going to order it online. One thing to be aware of is check and find out if you're going to buy stuff from card stores. Check to see where they're getting their pricing from. I know a lot of card stores use SCG, Star City Games to get their prices from. So just but just anything that gives you an idea, so you know how rough idea how much it's going to cost to update your deck. Another useful tool is a land calculator. So this is really good when you're modifying a deck. You're going to need to rebalance your mana base, and so something like this, which is just a web-based one. There's loads of these. If you just type in something like MTG land calculator in Google, you'll find ones. You probably can see the web address up there for this one. Also, as we're talking about pre-constructed decks, really good site for this that if you're into pre-cons you should really be reading, and this is Urtai's Lament. So Urtai's Lament run reviews of all the intro packs, event decks, the old school theme decks, the premium release stuff. They do a review, and I don't know if they do this for every single deck they've ever done, but they also do like a game where they actually take the decks and play them against one another. So if you are thinking about modifying intro decks, you definitely should go through this and just read up on the decks you want to modify, because it's like anything, you don't want to reinvent the wheel, and then you might see suggestions in here that make you think in certain directions. And finally, from what I can gather, this article came out as a byproduct of sort of Urtai's Lament. So I think it's whoever's works for or is Urtai's Lament, and they did an article on Gathering Magic called Meddling Simic Synthesis, which is rather fortunate because it's the deck we're going to be playing with. And this is what I was talking about. There's actually 2 suggestions for modifications in this. I haven't read the article properly because I didn't really want to get too biased by what was in here, which tends to happen. Stuff gets rubbed off on you and it does affect. Now that's fine if you want that to happen, but if you just want to just see what turns out of curiosity, then that's why I didn't read this particular article at this point. Although I suspect me just scanning through it has obviously influenced me in some ways. For instance, reminding me of the Simic charm certainly helped with what I'm sort of looking at. Other things that are useful if you don't have a particular deck building tool offline is things like Tapped Out. Now Tapped Out is a site where you can go in and you can put in decks, you can look up decks as well, and then you can run playtesting on this. So playtesting in this particular example is you're running it's a method I think people refer to as gold fishing, I think is the term you normally hear. I suspect there's other terms people might use where you're assuming that your opponent is doing nothing. So like a tool like this will have life totals in the top corner, or a life total in the top corner. So that will be your opponent. The ability to draw your hand and then to put stuff into play, and your library, your graveyard, your exile zone, all that sort of thing. The ability to move to the next turn, untap things. And what it really does is it just really makes sure that what's your opening hand going to look like? If I play these cards, how is this going to pan out? But at the same point, remembering that the opponent is not responding to you. So it's like an ideal situation where your opponent is completely stuck. But it does give a good indicator if your deck is not killing, or by a certain number of turns with an opponent that's not really doing anything, then you need to take a serious look at your deck. So that's another tool that is really useful, is the ability to just draw sample hands and just play out a scenario and just see how things pan out. So moving back to the deck, I'm just going to quickly go through what's in the deck, and like I said, for a better explanation you may be better off watching my unboxing. So we have 13 islands, 12 forests, 1 Simic Guild Gate, which is going to fix for green and blue, although slower because it enters the battlefield tapped. We have a Kraken Hatchling in here, which has really helped trigger the evolve. Cloudfin Raptor, which is an evolved creature. Enforced Adaptation puts a enchantment on a creature that basically gives it +1/+1 counters at the beginning of your upkeep. Bioshift lets you move counters around. Chronomaton can put counters on itself. Frilled Oculus is basically a creature that has a ability to pump +2/+2 on itself for 1 and a green, but it can only be used once per turn. So it's not like some cards where you can do multiple pumps. Tower Defense pumps for toughness on all creatures you control. Simic Guildmage both allows you to increase the number of counters that come on a creature when it comes into the battlefield, but also allows you to draw cards by removing counters from it. Shamble Shark's evolved creature with flash on it. Encrust basically stops permanents untapping during the untap step, and also locks down activated abilities. Croconura, I think that is, has reach and evolve, and is lopsided, so it's a 1/3, which again is supposed to help with the evolve triggers. Hindervines prevents damage dealt to any creatures. Prevents damage that would be dealt by creatures with no +1/+1 counters on them. So it makes, it sort of biases damage. Elusive Crasis. So this is a 0/4. It is unblockable. It's got evolve on it, so it's going to trigger evolve, but it's not going to become, powerful enough to attack because it's a 0 toughness. 0 power until it starts evolving itself. Drakewing Crasis has its power toughness lopsided in the opposite direction, so there is a sort of synergy between these, but it doesn't have evolve on it, so it's all sort of more one way really. Simic Keyrune, mana fixing, and also can turn into a blue crab artifact, 2/3 green. Sleep will tap down all target players' creatures. Crowned Ceratoc, trample on it and also gives trample to any creature with +1/+1. Ivy Lane Denizen will give green creatures additional +1/+1 counters. Unexpected Results is a pretty random card in that you shuffle your library, reveal the top card. If it's a non-land card, you can cast it without paying its mana cost. If it's a land card, you can put it into the battlefield. Fathom Mage has evolve and also card draw on it, but you enable the card draw by removing +1/+1. Sorry, start again. You enable the card draw. I'm thinking of the other one. I'm thinking of the Simic Guildmage there. You enable the card draw by putting +1/+1 counters on it, so either through the evolve trigger or using Bioshift to do that for you. Leyline Phantom has a bounce effect on it, and I think the reason why it's in the deck is it basically will allow you to bounce a creature back to your hand and then basically recast it. Adaptive Snapjaw, evolve on it, and it's lopsided, so that's going to help trigger other evolved creatures and copies of itself. No, not copies of itself, but yeah, anything that where its power is higher than the other creature's power. Urban Evolution, you draw 3 cards and you get to play an additional land. It's 3 green blue, so we're getting into sort of mid game territory here. So that will be handy if your hand's getting thin. Now you can restock your hand. Sapphire Drake. So in this particular deck, really, from what I can see, this is where stuff really starts to happen. And what I mean by that is when the Sapphire Drake comes into play, it has flying on it, but more importantly, because it's a 4/4 for 6 mana, but the important thing about that is, it also has to have something in addition to that. And what that is that it gives any creature that you control which has a +1/+1 counter on it flying. So suddenly all these creatures that you've been evolving suddenly have flying. And the idea is that, if you're in a position to do it, you swing with everything. And you effectively fly over your opponent's blockers if they're not running any flyers at all or a low percentage of flyers. Merfolk of the Depths has flash on it. So you've got this flash on a 4/2, but for 6 mana. So, I've yet to see what the merit of actually having this in the deck, apart from the fact that it's flash. It's very underpowered for the amount of mana that it costs to cast it. So, what did I do first of all with the deck? The first thing I did is just remove a few things. And let me just start to go around the other way, because so for instance, Merfolk of the Deep came out straight away. I took out Leyland Phantom because I felt that there may be better ways of doing this if you were going to do this, and I don't think it really added a neat trick to the deck, but you're looking for consistency in this deck, so it's not something I would keep in, in addition to just trying to get Evolve to work and other things. It's a bit, to me, it may be a bit late, and the fact that you've got to recast it as well. It's not a case of it's sort of a flicker effect, it's actually a recast you've got to do on this. Unexpected results, just too random. Ivy Lane Denizen, I felt there was other creatures in the deck that I wanted to increase which had Evolve on them, so that came out. Hindivines, again, there were slots in the support area of the deck which I felt would be better deserved by increasing certain cards, rather than have a sort of selective fog type card. Croconura, again, I thought there were better synergies that I could concentrate on the deck between certain creatures, and I would take this out as a way of allowing that to happen. Tower Defense, I wanted to look at some pump spells, but I felt this wasn't what I wanted. Frilled Oculus, again, nifty trick, but not really appropriate. The lopsidedness would help with certain evolve triggers, but again, there's other stuff in the deck that I wanted to expand. Chronomaton, nice idea. You can put these +1/+1 counters on it, and you could use the other card in the deck, where's it gone? The Zamek Guild Mage, to move those counters about, maybe. But I don't think overall it really helps with the evolve mechanic directly. Just helps you generate counters, provides a blocker, but of course you've got to be putting counters on it. So at certain times you've got to plan when you're going to tap this, so that it doesn't interfere with your overall game. Forced Adaptation, strange enough, I took this out. Now, I played a few sample hands with the original deck, and I found in certain circumstances this card was really useful. You could like stick it on a let me give you an example. You could stick it on a Cloudfin Raptor, and through the accumulated countering that was going on that Cloudfin Raptor, and then other evolved cards coming in a Goldfish scenario, your opponent was basically dead by about turn 5 easily. but I wanted to explore other things within the deck, and I felt that having a creature where you just got counters accumulating and you couldn't really move the enchantment itself was occupying a space that would be better used by something else. So with that all taken out, we're left with this sort of core deck, if you like. So just quickly so you can see what there's left there. Now again, remember with this deck, what I'm trying to do is keep things, you know, relatively cheap. So I could be a lot more aggressive with this and pull out a lot more and just really go for top of the range evolved creatures, but that's not the purpose of this video. It's just exploring, you know, tinkering with your deck initially. So, you know, this deck's very much aimed at people who are just playing around with the early stages of deck design and just trying it on an intro deck to keep things fairly cheap. So what did I end up doing? Well, basically, my idea was to introduce additional copies of certain cards which I thought would be useful. Now, the next stage on from this, which isn't in the video, is for you to basically go through and then work out further cards to remove that aren't really contributing to the deck, and then beefing up the cards that are. So this is an evolutionary process, excuse the pun, but you know, that's what this way of doing things is all about. Is you're going to one stage and you're going, okay, let's try this out, seeing what works. So at the moment you could say, you know, certain creatures are rather watered down. You know, there's 2 ofs, some things there's 3 ofs, there's 4 ofs, but there are a lot of 2 ofs. And for consistency, you would be wanting to move your creatures towards 4 ofs and your sort of best creatures. But in the interest of experimentation, here's an interim deck that I think is worth playing around with. So you've got your Kraken Hatchling, going to help trigger evolve and provide a, you know, an early blocker when you're going against other creatures. You know, not to be said for like a 1 mana 0/4. Cloudfin Raptor, it's got flying, it's got evolve on it, and it's going to, you know, start evolving, you know, through Kraken Hatchlings. If you're lucky enough to get, you know, Cloudfin Raptor in on turn 1, Kraken Hatchling on turn 2, start evolving it. Bioshift, I actually put 4 of these in because the way I was going with this is I really wanted to have the ability to consistently move counters around between cards. Simic Guildmage, I put an extra 1 in, that's now 2, because I found the abilities on here really useful. The ability to pay extra mana to bring in, you know, put counters, additional counters on creatures entering the battlefield, and also card draw by removing counters. Now here's a completely new addition, a Simic Charm. Got 2 of these in the deck. So what this does is this is a combination of, it's a series of ore and ore type things in the activated ability, or in the ability. So you have target creature gets +3/+3 until end of turn, or permanents you control gain hexproof until end of turn, or return target creature to its owner's hand. So some very useful combination of things there that you can utilize. You've got your pump spell, you've got your hexproof, and you've got your ability to bounce a creature, and that could be your own creature or an opponent's. So this deck would retain that bounce that the Leyline Phantom gave you, but it gives you more control. You've got much more control over how this works. Where do we get to? Yeah, Shamble Sharks still in the deck. There was 2 of those anyway. Encrust, I'm pretty sure there was 2 Encrusts in the original. Let me have a look. Yeah. Yeah, there was. Elusive Crisis. I actually upped this to 3, so there's added 2 more, because this is something I just wanted to experiment with and just see how much this would evolve. The fact that it's unblockable, what I've got to try and do is get counters onto this. So I felt that it was a worthwhile experiment with Evolve to see whether this would work. Drakewing Crisis got Flying and Trample, and I wanted that because it sort of complements the other Crisis. Although it doesn't have Evolve on it, the power toughness is biased in the other direction. Simic Keyrune, it's going to be mana fixing and also produces a handy blue crab artifact 2/3 on demand if you have green blue. I upped the number of sleeps as I wanted something else to be able to lock down creatures. Crowned Ceratok, kept that in. Fathom Mage, increased that by 1. Now the Fathom Mage, just if you're wondering, let's just do this. So that's 24 cents roundabout. So yeah, pretty cheap still. So you know, even though it's a rare. So I put an extra one of those in, you know, to experiment with this when it gets counters put on it. Adaptive Snapjaw. There was 2 of those in the deck already, so I left 2 in. I increased the number of urban evolutions. I was interested in seeing what effect sort of mid-game card draw would have, and mana, you know, additional mana, whether that would help with the deck, or whether by that point things were too far gone in the deck and you were already, you know, on your way to swinging with lethal. And then Sapphire Drake obviously put a second one in. So as this deck might be developed further, what you would look at doing is, if you discovered that yes, Sapphire Drake works really well in, you know, taking all these countered creatures and then suddenly giving them flying and just swinging with everything, or maybe doing that, casting a sleep on your opponent's creatures, and then you know, to basically tap down any flyers that they might have, and then doing this would work. You know, you would end up probably increasing these, and through experimenting with the deck you would work out which of the evolved creatures and non-evolved creatures work best together, put more of those in, take the less effective ones out, retry the deck, goldfish it, you know, obviously play it against other decks and just see what happens. So beyond that, what other options are there? You know, from things I haven't spoken about already. So if you're just looking at sticking with the whole evolve deck as it is, what else can you do? Well, the other thing is there are obviously other evolved creatures that you might want to look at. You might want to look at something like Experiment 1. So it's another 1 mana creature, but it's a 1/1. It doesn't have flying on it. So yeah, something you could look at. It's an uncommon, so again you want to check the price on this. The other thing that I felt in the deck might be lacking is the ability to directly counter something. You know, there's a few spells in there that will lock down creatures if they're up against a creature deck. But what if the opponent is playing some other strategy? So a counter spell like Spell Rupture, which is greatly enhanced and synergizes well with creature decks, you know, your own creature decks, particularly where you're pumping up the power on creatures through the counters, would be very useful. So that's something to consider. You know, modifying your support package in the deck to feature a Spell Rupture. Now that can be done several ways. One is, you'll notice the deck does have a lot more land than normal. I've noticed with intro decks that there's a tendency to have more land to avoid people getting mana screwed, but that may lead to mana flooding. In this deck we have 26 land, and I've kept the land count the same as it started. I haven't altered that, and that's again something else that you might want to consider doing, is dropping the land if you find you get mana flooded when you're doing like test hands and goldfishing and playing the deck. So when you try and do that, you're going to find that other things might work better in the place of Simic Guildgate. You might drop the basic lands. You might think that you don't want to use a Simic key rune because it just doubles up with more mana fixing here. Maybe later, on turn 3, and you might not need that. You might be better off with just a straight creature in here rather than something that does a bit of both, sort of thing. And that's all things you need to consider. So Spell Rupture is going to fill those spaces as they become available. Now in the handout that came with the deck, it did mention Primordial Hydra, which is a fantastic creature to put in this deck. It gives you in effect what I think is lacking in the deck, and that's a scalable creature which you can use to selectively alter the power and toughness of when it comes into play, and so you can play it strategically based on the state of the board and the state of your current evolve triggers. The problem is, as you probably guessed, just looking at the abilities on this and what it could potentially do, both let alone inside a Simic inside this particular deck. If we were to look up the prices on this, oops, Primordial Hydra, you can see you've got about, where is it? Yeah, $6 on. It's like these are also, this is a lightly played card here. So you might think, well, maybe that's too expensive for what I had in mind, but just so you know, that's that's one card that is recommended. Now, if you don't want to play the Primordial Hydra, what alternatives have you got? Well, you're looking for another card that's currently in standard if you're designing a standard legal deck, but if you're not, then you can look for any card that does a similar thing. Nimbus Swimmer is again scalable, has flying, but doesn't have such overwhelming abilities. And the other thing is that you could do a similar thing with, although it does involve you utilizing counters you have rather than mana necessarily, or the X mana. It does cost 1 and a green to activate this enchantment, but you can reuse it, and it puts XX green ooze tokens into play, where XX is the number of +1/+1 counters removed from a particular creature. So it'll have a similar effect, but it's not, probably in order, that's best, then that, then that. But you could argue that this, it effectively does a different thing. What happens as a result is also removes counters from creatures that already have them on them. So when other creatures come in, they're going to re-trigger. So you're sort of reusing counters elsewhere. So it's a slightly different effect that's going on there. More expensive things to do might be, you could, things like looking at other creatures which have evolve on them. So if you wanted, say, additional mana available to your deck in green, you could use Gaia Sage instead. If you wanted smoother mana fixing, or faster mana fixing, and you were prepared to lose life for it, then you could use Breeding Pool instead of the sort of slower fixer that's in the deck. Other interesting evolve related things, although may not have evolve on them, is biomass mutation, where you can sort of level out all your creatures. If you want to do that for a particular, you're going to swing with them all. Yeah, those sort of tricks. Also, there's Master Biomancer, which, probably being a mythic, is incredibly expensive. Let's just have a quick look. So yeah, you get $9–10 card. Yeah, could be more expensive on other sites, obviously, but incredibly synergistic with evolve stuff. And then finally, looking at the legendary creatures in here. If you're looking for more of a sort of EDH bent, or just you want to use a legendary creature in the deck, and the ability is useful for evolve. So this enters the battlefield with X 1/1 +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the greatest power among other creatures you control. Another great, evolve leveler that you can use here. Also got card draw on it. Actually, no, it's not leveling, is it? Because it enters the battlefield with X. This is a great. Yeah, sorry, it's used in reverse. It's basically taking the greatest power amongst all your creatures, adding counters on that, and then what that's going to do is actually re-trigger all the evolves on creatures that then have lower power or toughness than this card. And then there's the card draw equal to this, so it gets rather complicated. So more card draw, basically. And in terms of stuff to try, that's probably slightly more expensive. That's about the list that I put together. Other things that you might want to work with is exploiting particular synergies by using cards outside of the evolve mechanic. And one thing that I've seen suggested is the use of undying. I know that's suggested in the actual handout, the leaflet that you get in the deck. So one thing that you can do is this little sort of synergy combo, which is Young Wolf, Cloudfin Raptor, Rapid Hybridization. So let me try and explain this. You have a Cloudfin Raptor in play. On the next turn, you have access to a blue and a green mana. And what you do is you cast the Young Wolf. It's a 1/1. That will trigger the Cloudfin Raptor's evolve and make that a 1/2. So you've got a 1/2 and you've got Young Wolf, which is a 1/1. You then cast Rapid Hybridization on your own Young Wolf. So the Young Wolf goes to the graveyard, but because it has Undying, and notice Undying is not the same as Regenerate, it's a completely different effect. So Undying brings a Young Wolf back with a +1/+1 counter on it, so it's now a 2/2, which, not surprisingly, re-triggers the Cloudfin Raptor's evolve trigger. Cloudfin Raptor's it is at 1/2, but the Young Wolf is at 2/2. So that now becomes a 2/3. So we have a 2/3 and a Young Wolf at 2/2. Also, as a result of the Rapid Hybridization, we have a 3/3 Green Frog Lizard creature come into play, which then re-triggers the evolve on the Cloudfin Raptor. So the Cloudfin Raptor, which was, I think, so we're now up to 2/3, if I'm correct, now becomes triggered again. There's now a 3/4, so 3/4, 3/3, 2/2. Now, if I've made a mistake there, please correct me, because I didn't do the sensible thing and write all this down. So I've just been working through that in my head. So if I got the triggers in the wrong order, or you think I've made a mistake, please let me know. So the point here is that undying is a really interesting keyword mechanic to use with this evolve trigger. You get some interesting stuff going on. So look at your your undying creatures that you might have or that are out there. Strangleroot Geist is another one, which again you could work through and find out whether does it, how would that work in certain scenarios. Slightly higher cost, so would occur later in the game, or not later in the game, but on later than young. You could do stuff with Young Wolf. Simic Guildmage. The reason why I've just re-mentioned this is there's an interesting interaction between Simic Guildmage and Fathom Mage, in that you can use it to remove counters from Fathom Mage, or a counter from Fathom Mage, so that when a creature comes in, it re-triggers the Fathom Mage if its power and toughness is greater than either the power and toughness of the Fathom Mage. So what would happen is, supposing again you had a turn where you had enough mana to trigger this and enough mana to cast a creature to that would trigger the Fathom Mage. If you've removed a counter, so what you do is you cast this, play this on your Fathom Mage, take a counter off. So by doing that you get to draw a card. The creature comes into play, puts a Fathom another counter back on through the evolve mechanic, and then you get to draw another card. So those were I felt the most important synergies, which either were new to the deck or were in the deck already, or would be new, if you added them. So that will be an interesting angle, I suppose, to go with the deck, is develop it off down a evolve undying synergy. There is another thing that I've not really thought through, so this could be complete rubbish, and that's is there a usable relationship between flicker and triggering evolve? Now, one of the things you've got to be careful of is flickering evolved creatures, because effectively it will remove the counters. But that's not to say you couldn't flicker creatures that don't have evolve on them and don't have counters on them, like Fatty, to trigger evolved creatures that you have. So you could Conjurer's Closet a Scab Goliath, for instance, which is a 6/9. Now, of course, it's a neat trick, but the card slots that you would use in order to do it may be better used by something else that is a lot less fiddly. But it's just something to think about. Is the relationship between evolve and flicker, can it be abused in any way? And I suspect if keep your eyes out in later sets where these cards will still be in standard, where suddenly flicker effect, like here's an example of another one, Ghostly Flicker, a reusable flicker effect becomes much more much cheaper in cost, and then things would could get seriously broken. And finally, I'm going to finish off with problem triggers. Now, there's a number of, in your quest for looking for clever interactions, there's a number of problems you can get into. One is if you think, oh, maybe I could use Soul Bond. And again, it's important. One of the great things about this deck actually is it really does get you thinking about triggers, if nothing else. Even if you think Evolve is a rubbish mechanic and it's the least powerful of all the Gatecrash intro decks, just the actual act of going through and looking how the Evolve trigger works is a really useful exercise, because triggers are one of the things that I think trip over a lot of Magic players and stop people from really understanding the game properly and how to do some very clever combat tricks and other bounce tricks, and just generally enter the battlefield effects, all that sort of stuff, stacking triggers. So with the soul bond, the problem is the pairing of the soul bond, which would make Warfield Silverheart from a 4/4 to an 8/8, and enabling you to trigger more stuff depending on what the state of your evolve counters is, or your counters on your evolve creatures, would not happen until after the point at which evolve triggers are resolved. So they would, because the order of the triggers in this, the soul bonding would happen after the evolve triggers on the other creature. So you may well get stuff triggering from this just being a 4/4. There's no doubt about that. But stuff triggering it through being an 8/8 isn't going to happen, because it becoming an 8/8 happens after all the evolved stuff's fired off and resolved. And again, if I've got that wrong, please correct me. But that's my understanding of the point at which the soul bond, sorts itself out. That pairing. Now, the other problem trigger again occurs about a sort of misuse of a clever trigger. The deck currently has Shamble Shark and Fathom Mage in it. Now, Shamble Shark has flash on it, which means you can do some nifty things. Supposing you've got a Fathom Mage in play. Now, I've had to write this out because this does get complicated. So you've got Fathom Mage in play as a 1/1. You've got 2 Shamble Sharks in your hand, and note they've got flash on them. You've also got untapped mana available to you, 2 green and 2 blue. So what you do is you cast your first Shamble Shark. Now what you're hoping is going to happen is you're going to get a double card draw on the Fathom Mage because of the way you think triggers are actually going to work. However, the reality may be slightly different, and you may get thoroughly disappointed by what happens. So you cast the first Shamble Shark. Fathom Mage evolve triggers and checks for power toughness. And at the moment, the Fathom Mage is 1/1 versus a 2/1. So looks fine. Looks like when this resolves, the Fathom Mage, you'll get to do a card draw on it because it will add counters. But what you then do is you get greedy. You think, right, in response to that trigger, I'm going to cast my second Shamble Shark. So at that point, Fathom Mage evolve triggers and it checks for the power toughness. Now notice the first trigger evolved by the first Shamble Shark actually hasn't resolved yet, because you've responded to that with your flash Shamble Shark. So at that point the Fathom Mage is still a 1/1, and so the check says, yep, at that point, Fathom Mage is still a 1/1, Shamble Shark's a 2/1, so yep, that's going to evolve. However, on resolution things get different. The casting of the second Shamble Shark resolves, because that's the last thing on the stack, or it's effectively above the stack to the first Shamble Shark at that point, because you flashed it in. It resolves, and the corresponding evolve on the Fathom Mage resolves. It rechecks at that point, so the evolve trigger does recheck on resolution, and it's a 1/1 versus a 2/1. So that's +1/+1 added to Fathom Mage, so it's now a 2/2, and you get to do your card draw. However, when the casting of the first Shamble Shark finally resolves and the corresponding evolve on the Fathom Mage resolves, my spelling's gone really wonky on this, but it doesn't really matter. It's just a reminder. It gets rechecked as a 2/2 versus a 2/1, so there's no +1/+1 counter on it. So what I'm trying to say here is be careful when you're doing clever things with flash and evolve, and you're trying to like double do something because a trigger's not resolved. Be careful, because the evolve does recheck the trigger on resolution, and if power and toughness has changed at that point, then to your disadvantage, then the thing's not going to trigger. So there we have it, really. So that's as much as I really wanted to do in this video. The idea was to sort of put it out there and not feel that I was tied to producing a series on this. But what I will do is review all the comments and see, whether there would be a good thing in doing a follow-up video to this, to explore some of those deck synergies that I was sort of talking about, whether those are viable things. I mean, that's the sort of direction I would probably go in with this deck, is look at the synergies with other cards that are not necessarily evolve but help the evolve mechanic. And also the other area is really looking at this rather generous mana base. Okay, so that's it. Thanks for watching.